So you guys driven anything good lately?
You know, I haven't. We haven't had anything in a while.
You probably saw this Mazda MX-30 out in the lot. I think it's a really handsome little car. In fact, I love everything that Mazda's got right now. And maybe we'll save this for the show.
Sure.
Another big puzzle from a sales standpoint.
That's a bizarre one, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll save it for the official part of the show, right? So, Mike, you just driving classic cars now?
You know, I had the Jeep truck in Scottsdale.
Gladiator.
The Gladiator, yeah, thanks. And it was like a fully base car, like nothing under the sills on the bottom, and it was it's a normal Jeep thing, right? Like,
What was the price? Do you know?
I got to look it up.
Yeah.
But I got a little tired of the rear doors. Like, if you like throw your bag in, and like the door is so small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another brand we got to talk about, I think. Jeep.
They're an interesting place right now, yeah.
And yeah, 24 hours of Daytona this weekend.
Yeah.
So first official outing of the C8R.
And Mazda's returning to. There's a Mazda in it.
Well, Mazda's in the DPI category.
Yeah.
And last year, they won it's been a horrific problem for them. They came so close to winning races and they'd break down or something would happen. And then last year, they went on a bit of a tear. So they've got it ironed out right now. It should do well. Acura's doing well. The one we'll see how quali and all that goes, but or they probably already qualified by now. But Cadillac, which had been dominating the segment, is now getting its butt kicked. So we'll see if they're able to do anything.
Yeah.
But you know, in IMSA, they use this balance of power thing. So if you go real fast, you know, they throw lead plates in your car until you slow down to where the other guys are. And if somebody else goes fast, they do the same thing. And if you're real slow, they'll let you up a little bit. They're trying to keep everything even Steven, but it can be maddening too for the teams, you know, where you get a little wrinkle, you outthink somebody, and boom, you're penalized for it. So in qualification and the like, a lot of teams will just sandbag it. They'll do really well, but not that well, just so they don't get a bunch of weight added.
Well, and I wonder too with the Corvette, you know, like the Ford GT, like, you know, winning the first year was quite a feat, and maybe had something to do with balance of power at Le Mans. But
Probably.
It'd be interesting to see how if they treat the Corvette similarly, like, oh, thanks for bringing the new car.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're going to start in a few seconds here. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world. And by DIA MTS, for advanced manufacturing machinery and lightweight components.
All right. How you be, Gary?
Good. 2 weeks in a row.
What do you mean 2 weeks in a row?
We've been in the studio two weeks in a row.
I like
it's a big change, and you know,
we're running around like crazy.
And we had that last week's show with Sandy Monroe, and apparently Elon Musk watched the show because he
tweeted out.
Yeah, so,
right.
It's quite a show, but we've got perhaps a better show today. I'd like to think so.
I like to think
continuous improvement.
The next show is always the next best show.
It is.
So tell everybody, one of our heroes is here.
Mr. Mike Austin.
I'd like to think that it's a great show I'm on.
Yeah.
Right. Mike Austin from Hemmings Motor News. Is that the full title, or you just go by Hemmings?
It's just Hemmings.
Okay.
Motor News is the big magazine that everybody knows, but we do more than that. So, and we're growing to do more than that. So it's kind of like Motor News is a publication by the Hemmings brand.
Gotcha. So what do you do?
That's a loaded question. That's a loaded question.
Depends on who's watching and listening. No, I run the digital side of things, so putting things on the website, and then the bigger work of getting more things on the website and figuring out how we do that. We have the staff is mostly in Bennington, Vermont, and they put out 3 magazines, so they're always working pretty hard. And then we need to find ways to get even more writing out of them, but also I think have fun while we're doing it too, because a big part of Hemmings is selling that automotive hobby, and a big part of the automotive hobby is going out and doing things. So in celebrating that, we need to be doing them ourselves and saying, you need to check this out. So a lot of work to do, but great place and a great energy, and we got big things ahead of us.
So where can our viewers find it? Hemmings.com?
Hemmings.com.
Okay, with 2 M's.
2 M's.
Yeah, cool. Well, we got to let everybody know our special guest today is Jeff Schuster from LMC Automotive. And Jeff, it's great to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's fantastic.
And so you're what? Analyst, consultant? How do we describe you?
Yeah, all of the above. I make coffee as well, so it's pretty much
Multifunctional.
anything that we can do. We've got to do it. But yeah, LMC Automotive forecaster, market intel analyst group. So yeah, I look at the market and try to make sense of this wonderful industry that we're part of.
Well, that's why we want you here today. Help us make sense.
All right, so tell us 2019. It wasn't that long ago, but 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you see the year? Did it surprise you?
The year actually came in exactly where we were at the beginning of the year from a forecast standpoint. So I guess that's the good news. The interesting news along the way is we had certainly some movement. I think as we started the year last year, it was looking a little weaker than expected. Fleet was a little bit stronger. Some of that was commercial, so that's not necessarily bad. But the overall market, was sitting with a lot of uncertainty. And I think as the year progressed, we held on to that uncertainty. It flipped over in the second half of the year. Actually, was still fairly strong and decent. Some of that was incentive driven, so there was a little bit of movement there on incentives. But the year ended up pretty strong. From our calculation, because we take out some of what we consider medium duty, we were just under 17 million units. So, still a strong year.
Mm-hmm.
But, I agree with you with the uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty, doubts, uneasiness in the industry, not on the part of the car buyers.
No, they came out. Consumers were there, fighting through all this uncertainty. As an industry, we were talking about it, and I think especially if you talked to a lot of the suppliers, they thought the sky was falling last year.
Depends what programs they were on.
And it does depend what program you were on, absolutely. But overall, it was a pretty strong year.
Yeah.
So what do you think accounted for that? I mean, why do you think that there was this consumer demand in light of the uncertainty that the professionals perhaps had?
Yeah, well, I think some of that, especially when we got into the second half, it was deal driven to some extent. I think consumers, you've got a few things going on. You've got a lot of great products that are out there. Obviously, vehicles have gotten really competitive. You've got, we went through in 2018, even 2019 still, some transition between the car and the truck markets. So I think you had that playing out where people were still replacing and getting out of their cars, sending those off to the used car market and jumping in the new SUVs. You had some new product. You had content. So I think there was some interesting safety in content that consumers wanted from a connectivity standpoint. And I think all of that certainly drove buyers in. Affordability became the issue. And I think that's the thing until the Fed pivoted. That's the thing that we were most concerned with last year.
Explain that.
From an interest rate standpoint, interest rates were rising. The environment as we started the year, we were looking at interest rates continuing to rise. And then you had the Federal Reserve start cutting rates instead of continuing to raise them. And that alleviated some of the pressure on the consumer. There's still issues. Monthly payment, trying to get that monthly payment balanced or at least as low as possible. Definitely was an issue in 2019, will continue to be an issue in 2020, but overall there was a little bit of that pressure released, and I think that helped, especially when you combine that with higher incentives at the in the second half of the year.
I got to believe job creation, too, played into all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the economy was humming along, the job market, wage growth, people are employed. That definitely plays a role with consumer psyche and them wanting to buy that big ticket purchase like a vehicle.
So are people buying vehicles? You mentioned technology changes. I mean, are people saying, hey, this has got ADAS, this has got that sort of stuff, my existing car doesn't have that, or this car has Alexa and my car doesn't have that, and that would drive them into the market?
I think it's playing a role. I wouldn't say it's not moving the needle in mass numbers, but I think there is certainly a section of the the consumer base that is interested in technology. Been a lot of attention obviously around mobility and autonomous driving, and some of that feature content that is starting to find its way into vehicles today, I think is definitely providing another reason to go to showrooms or to go online and looking for the vehicle.
Let's talk about some brands, in particular Jeep. Jeep's been the hottest brand for I don't know how many years now, in the hottest segment in the market. Sales went down last year. In fact, every single model, with the exception of the Grand Cherokee, was down. What do you think's going on there, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you've got a few things. You've got an aging lineup, for the most part, relative to what's out there, and you've got increased competition. So everybody wants and has an SUV now, all the way through the super premiums, the ultra luxury vehicles. So with all of those SUVs out there, there's more competition, and when you're sitting on a lineup that's a little bit older, even though they're in a commanding position, they've been a very strong brand, and we expect that to reverse. They definitely had some issues, I think, from a competitive standpoint in 2019. Of course, with the top line falling, they fell as well, but certainly to a higher proportion than the rest of the industry.
Yeah, it is surprising. So looking at the numbers, so the Compass for the year was down 16%. The Wrangler was down 5%. Cherokee down 20%, and they put the Belvedere plant on 2-week hiatus. Grand Cherokee up 8%. Renegade down 21%. I mean, these are...
Well, I think it gets to what Jeff is saying. They're getting to be a little old in the tooth.
Look across that lineup, and from a competitive standpoint, they're older vehicles that really need a redesign or need a refreshing.
But they added the Gladiator, and it's... I think if you put Wrangler and Gladiator together, they're up over not having Gladiator.
Correct.
But you'd think with a model like that, it would have brought the whole brand up, and it did not.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a little bit more of a rebound in 2020 when you've got a first full year of the Gladiator. So we do think some of that's going to reverse. And in fact, we've got the top line down a little bit more, a couple more percent in 2020. And we think Jeep's going to be flat to maybe up a little bit. So they're going to get a little bit of that back from a share standpoint, but still going to be suffering with the same issues that they did in 2019, in the majority of their lineup being on the old side.
But I mean, isn't the Grand Cherokee the oldest one in the lineup right now?
You're probably right.
I mean, so that's the one that's up, and it's the oldest.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on there, Mike?
It's classic. I don't know. If you drive them, they do not feel as old as they really are. It's hard to believe, but I'm stumped.
Yeah. Let's talk about another brand, trouble brand, Nissan, which in December saw a massive drop in sales. I think they were off like 43,000 units for 1 month. What do you think is going on there? Is it because the whole imbroglio with Carlos Ghosn and what's his name, Jose Munoz, who had been running Nissan and has now gone to Hyundai, who I want to ask you about too. But what do you think is going on at Nissan right now? Why they've just fallen off a cliff?
Well, I think that in the background certainly doesn't help the brand and the brand's image. I think overall, though, they're suffering from some of the same issues. You had a massive push with the Rogue and heavy incentive use in the vehicles, really getting volume over the past couple of years, and I think it came to a head. You've got an aging lineup. You've got some emphasis on the car side of the lineup that they tried to push with the launches, and I think all at a time again when consumers are really migrating more and more towards SUVs.
And then Hyundai Kia, boy, now they were so car heavy. Looks like they've got that problem licked, at least for the time being.
Yes, so they're benefiting on the other side. So again, it's fresh product wins, and I think having that and having new vehicles in the lineup that weren't there previously certainly is going to benefit.
So, I mean, I want to go back to the Nissan thing again. Okay, do consumers even know who Carlos Ghosn is?
I think consumers are more savvy
Well, with
than
the
you
escape
think.
out of Japan,
Yeah.
everybody
Well, I
knows
mean,
who
but
he
I mean,
is.
but
He's in the news. I mean, this is Hollywood style stuff.
Yeah.
So I think more consumers know about him than did. But yeah, maybe that didn't affect their sales.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's going to go to a dealership and go, you know what, that guy escaped from Japan. I can't buy this car. I mean, it's just like.
Yeah, I suspect that didn't play much of a role, but probably more on the aging lineup and incentive use. Pull
Well,
back on incentives.
I wonder about internally. You know, when you lose a guy the caliber of Jose Munoz, there's things, slow down to a crawl as you try to get a new person in there. They've got to come up to speed. And same thing with the Carlos Ghosn. There's all this turmoil. People's eye is off the ball within the company. So I don't think it's the car buying public that cares anything about this.
No, it's probably how they ran things internally, and you've got all that turmoil at the top. Is the alliance going to exist or not? Is it going to survive? Who's going to lead the company globally? So I think there was a lot of uncertainty around just the leadership and the strategy for Nissan, and they obviously are going to look to try to get that back in the next year or so.
Well, I thought it was interesting that there was a report that there was a big dealer meeting and the new head of Nissan talked to the dealers in the United States, and then the dealers were concerned that there is a perception that Nissan is something of a bargain brand. And I would think that would be, in some ways, not necessarily a bad thing in terms of moving sheet metal, but do you have a sense that that is a negative for a company now?
I think it can be. Certainly from a margin standpoint, if they're trying to push content and pricing, that's gonna be challenging with that type of an image. Mm-hmm. It depends how you play the bargain brand. You don't want to be the cheap brand. You want to be the value brand.
Right.
I think that's obviously what, if they want to spin this, that's the direction they'd want to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Because I just wonder, I mean, so isn't it normally that you sort of have this bifurcation of the market where if you're a luxury brand, you're doing okay because you're the luxury brand, and then if you're the one that is the value brand, you're doing okay, but it's this middle where there's lots of churn and
the nobody area where your definition of what are you, and there's a few brands in that space, and that can be challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in fact, Infiniti, I believe, dropped even more than Nissan did on a percentage basis.
When you talk about that bifurcation, though, I think you could argue both Nissan and Infiniti. What do they stand for?
Yeah.
They haven't defined themselves as a value brand or as a luxury brand or as a engineering prowess or any of those things. So maybe that's part of the challenge.
So Honda and Acura. So what are they?
I mean, Honda is like this quality. You're getting. It's sort of Honda and Toyota. I know they're paired. Honda's maybe the slightly more exciting version historically, but it's that image of the Japanese car that beat up all the American cars that that changed consumer interests. I think that carries on. That, like you're buying this rock solid piece of car that you don't have to worry about. Acura, I think, in the last few years has struggled to say, like, what is Acura, and you can see it in their, especially outside of the SUVs, in their car offerings are kind of like, what's going, there's nothing really getting me excited here aside from the NSX, and you can see it in their, they've sort of struggled to say what are we offering here.
They've
that
been
makes it
struggling
special?
for a long time, Acura, and Infiniti, I think, had a stronger position. I think you go back to the G and even the FX. I think when those two were kind of the pinnacles of the lineup, I think they were in a stronger position to potentially build upon that, and they didn't do it. And they flipped around with names and programs, and I think they lost their identity. And now I would put them in the same position as Acura right now, where they're kind of lost in the in between premium and the mainstream.
So then Lexus is the only one that really came out of that in terms of at a position of strength?
Yeah.
Well, because you think about it, I mean, you had Acura started, and Infiniti started, and Lexus started, and Lexus continues to be a powerful brand where these other two seem to be wallowing.
Yeah, but even then, there's maybe a little bit of uncertainty because Lexus, if you watch their TV commercials, they're pushing themselves, like passion and athleticism and sportiness in that grille, and that doesn't necessarily translate to SUVs, and it also doesn't necessarily translate to the Lexus buyer who probably is buying it because it's a Lexus. It's vault-like and quiet. So there's they're attempting a transition, and I would say if there's anything they're doing wrong, it's that they're trying to move too much too suddenly. Whether or not the endpoint is a good place to be is another question. But
Yeah, maybe trying to be too German. And go after the stronghold of obviously what's dominated the premium market.
But isn't that a little Akio Toyota, race car guy, and he's got this premium brand, and so he'll ignite the passion for drivers, and basically it's.
I'm excited.
Buyers really
I like it, but I'm not a Lexus
buyers
buyer.
really want to buy. Lexus buyers want to buy RXs, and pretty much that's it, right? Or the other NX and the other SUVs in the lineup.
I think probably the advertising that we're talking about is a reflection of what Lexus is discovering internally, that they're having a hard time getting a younger generation. So they've got to spiff up the brand image, knowing they're going to keep the older buyers, and still have this reputation for quality, but they got to do something to bring in a younger buyer as they look towards the future. Hey, look, we got to take a real quick break right now, but we're going to come back. I've got questions. I want to ask you about Mazda. I want to ask you about electric cars, or I know Gary wants to ask you about electric cars. But first, a shout out to our good friends at Borg Warner.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back talking with Jeff Schuster from LMC Automotive. And another brand I want to ask you about for your insights, Mazda. I like every single vehicle in their lineup. I think their styling is spot on, inside and out. The vehicles drive well. They appeal to enthusiasts, or at least to me as an enthusiast. Those vehicles are nailed to the showroom floor. They just don't sell. Why?
They are, yeah. Really tough 2019 for Mazda. A brand that has just been flying under the radar for quite a long time, and I think really, again, trying to maybe redefine or rejuvenate its image, and I think has struggled connecting with consumers. I would agree. I think from an offering of, if you look at price, look at styling, look at features, content, enthusiast element, brands has a lot to offer, but just hasn't hit the mark with consumers. It's a bit of a mystery. Maybe the new with the CX-30 this year, we'll see what happens.
I'm test driving one right now, and I like it too. I hope it sells.
Yeah, I just think that Mazda's problem is that where's a Mazda dealer around here?
Well, there's one on Plymouth Road, but that's the only one I know of.
Right.
The only reason I know it's been there forever.
Right, and you can trip over a Ford dealer,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
just one anywhere, right? And so it's just basically if somebody says, "Oh, that car looks great," I think see the commercial. Oh, I want to go find one of those. It's like, but where is it?
Well, there is this thing called the internet where you.
Well, I know, but it's just. I mean, I think that is a huge problem for that company.
Yeah.
That they just
the dealer
have.
network.
Yeah, the dealer network is and I would make the argument that a brand that is from a statistical point of view gaining ground, but from a actual cars on the street or numbers, not so much as Mitsubishi. And they've made some perfectly nice, reasonable cars with some perfectly good technology in them. And again, how would you find one? It's very difficult. And when you pass 4 Chrysler dealers on your way to the place, you might want, I think I'll just go buy a Chrysler. But So I mean, let's talk about the big ones. I mean, General Motors and Ford. Okay, if you took out their truck and SUV offerings, both of those companies would be swimming in red ink. So,
Oh, sure.
talk to us what's going on in that whole sort of space.
Well, and I guess put FCA in there in an early transition to the truck lineup when it didn't necessarily look like that was the smartest thing to do. But yeah, I think that's where the margin is. That's what consumers want, and they're taking advantage of that right now. Obviously, if we have some kind of a reversal, we don't see it, but it's possible that some new product on the car side starts reigniting consumers to that piece of the market. Again, don't see it in the near term or even the midterm, but as of now, the truck reigns, and I think that's not only great for consumers that want them, but also for the companies that want margin and have a little bit more room to play with. I was talking about incentives earlier. You can increase your incentives a little bit when you're getting price, and I think that's the market that we're in right now. It's just a matter of, if we start to see the pullback in the economy at some point, we're going to, how consumers respond, or some kind of an external shock, where oil prices spike up, how consumers respond to that. But overall, I don't think we're looking at a potential repeat of 2008.
So, are you saying that the margins on trucks are sufficiently high for OEMs that they can afford to put more incentive money on trucks than they can on cars where the margin is thinner?
You have more play there because the margins are much more robust, and not only that, but the price points are still rising. So consumers are buying more content. So you can play around with the mix as well between content, prices, and balance that with incentives depending on what's moving where, and you can move that around. It's been done regionally, so things have gotten a lot more sophisticated with incentive use as well.
Moreover, residuals, especially on pickups, are so strong
Yeah,
that lease rates can be bargains, really. And you see the ads in the Sunday paper, if you look there at all. For anybody who still remembers newspapers, I mean, some of the bargains on trucks, the lease rates are unbelievably low.
So when looking at your crystal ball, though, with trucks, are we going to see the bottom for sedans in 2020? Like when does that shift stabilize?
So we don't think so. We think the sedans and cars in general, I think we're expecting them around still a quarter of the market. If you look at the car as a broad term, including sporty and the couple of wagons and so forth that are there, but so falling, but not quite the bottom yet. It's still got a few more years before, but we're starting to see it bottom out over the next couple of years, kind of in that low 20% range. At the same time, to kind of go to the opposite of that, we expect, and we got really close in 2019, 2020 we'll see SUVs at 50% plus for the market this year.
Wow. Let's talk electric cars. Industry's under the gun. They got to sell these things. There's a ton of them coming. But Gary, you were the one who had raised the issue before the show. Tesla's doing pretty well.
Yep.
Nobody else is.
Right.
What do they got to do, or can they?
Well, we're in that transition. We're at the point this year. You've got a lot of launches coming. So we do have a boost in 2020, but it's not a substantial boost. We're looking for roughly 250,000 units last year. This year, call it 300,000 units. Tesla still owns the majority of that volume. So you've got a doubling of the offerings. So there were roughly 16 vehicles on sale in 2019. I think we've got in the mid-30s in 2020 as far as the vehicle offering.
Mid-30s of models?
I believe 33 models competing for 300,000 units. And then back off Tesla owning 200 plus thousand of that, you've got the remainder of that really fighting for not much volume. So I think if you average it and look at the average volume, last couple of years been hovering around 15,000 units on average across the vehicles that are available. It's going to drop to under 10,000 this year and kind of hold, even though we see the volume going up, the number of offerings over the next few years continues to exponentially increase.
So are the OEMs going to have to eat this?
I think at least over this period in the U.S. Now maybe they can offset it with the volume they're going to get in Europe potentially, or China. So I think there's more opportunity there from a volume standpoint. But at this stage, we just don't see the breakthrough here in the U.S. to get the volume, the per vehicle volume up.
This sort of raises an interesting question, and some have suggested that the U.S. market will be the third market when it comes to EVs, and that Europe and China will be 1 and 2. Europe because of the regulations, this year with 95% of the vehicles having to have conveniently 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer, which you're just not going to get with a normal vehicle.
Right.
And you're going to have it electrified some way, and then you're going to have to balance that out with full electric vehicles. And so Europe will do that, and then China is not far behind in terms of their new energy vehicle program, and they're still doing that. And here it's just like, who cares? So we become a technological laggard, which concerns me.
Well, it doesn't concern me at all. I mean, it's a global industry. The domestic automakers are watching what's going on. When you look at, the electric startups, Rivian, Tesla, Lucid, Faraday, they're all based here. The other thing, too, is, Auto Forecast Solutions put out an interesting study showing that only 10% of all the BEVs sold in China are retail. The rest of it's fleet. So how much natural demand for EVs really exists in China? And let's see what happens in Europe, too. They've got to sell those BEVs. I think everyone's going to be scrambling to try to find out how they can get credits to offset it. I think FCA was brilliant locking in Tesla to get their credits. And I think the Europeans are in deep trouble because Tesla owns the market in Europe as well. I don't know what percentage market share they've got there, but it's probably close to what they've got here, which is like 78%.
It's expanding as well,
The
especially
Chinese,
with the plant coming.
The Chinese are coming into Europe too. AIways just announced they're going to start selling electrics in China in April. And so there's only so many people right now who are going to buy an electric in China. Tesla's got most of them. The Chinese are coming in with lower prices than what the Europeans can offer. If I were in Europe, I'd even be more worried.
With the American market, though, we're getting at a point, I think of the Mustang Mach-E, where it's like the size is similar to an Escape or an Edge, other traditional offerings. The price is getting down to maybe a highly contented equivalent gas model, and the range is reasonable. I mean,
Adequate, yeah.
Is that? But we've had 200+ mile cars, EVs out before, and they haven't moved the needle at all. So, I guess what is the Ford going to make a difference, or is there some tipping point where consumers will finally go, okay, I'm ready to do this?
Yeah, I think you hit on some interesting areas, and that is the Mustang Mach-E. It's in the right segment. Its size is about right as well. Styling is there. Content and kind of feature lineup is there. And the price is competitive as well. And I think that's what the market, aside, maybe Tesla's gotten too much credit just because they were there first with consumers. But even their lineup isn't in the right segments. So I think and I think as we see more of these offerings that kind of line up with the mainstream market, the consumer here in the U.S., I think you're going to see more that are willing to take a shot on it. It's an education, so I think the consumer has to get educated. Number one, on the performance aspects of EVs, but also I think on just how to own an EV. The charging at night, the range issue. Most people a 300-mile range is going to be adequate for most commuting, of course. Road trips is another story, and I think that's infrastructure is still a big problem here in the U.S., but also in Europe and in China.
You know, I actually saw a Mach-E when I was driving home from work one
In
day.
the real world.
In the real world. And as I'm driving up, I thought, gee, is that an Infinity? Because of the swoopy lines on the body side and over the fenders. And then I'm driving and I'm like, it was coming out of the Bosch facility on 5 Mile in Haggerty, and very little camo at all. And then I realized, oh, it's a Mach-E. And I was surprised how small it looks in the real world.
Interesting. Wow. Huh.
Yeah, it was very shocking to me. But okay, you know, we've heard there's the electric Hummer going to be coming. Does that help at all, or is that just a novelty act?
No, I think you start to piece all these areas together and you're hitting segments. And obviously there's more than just the Hummer. You know, you've got Rivian is launching before that. You're going to have an F-150, whatever you want to think of Cybertruck. But, you know, you're going to have a lot of product in that space as well. And I think, again, another segment that consumers want here in the U.S. So it's starting to expand and get more mainstream and have a little bit more from an offering standpoint. All of it's going to help. However, all that being said, we're still looking at small percentages from a market standpoint.
It's going to hit 5?
It'll hit 5. The question of when. So, you know, we'd put it past 2025 before you get 5% of the
Really?
market. Yeah.
Yeah, remember last year, pure BEVs, U.S. market, 1.4%.
Right.
Of which Tesla had 78%.
Exactly.
So
yeah, percentage drops a little bit this year. We're still under 2% of the market from our forecast for 2020 for BEVs.
yeah.
Wow.
Hey, let's switch gears a little bit here in the show. Gary, Dr. Data is about to make an appearance, no?
I believe so. We should be able to. I don't know which number we have, but Katie, if you have one, throw it up.
All right.
All right. So, we talked about this a little bit before the show. Okay. So, I found this to be rather interesting. So, in 2018, Rolls-Royce sold the highest number of vehicles ever in its history. How many did it sell? So, Jeff, we'll start with you. You're the guy who ought to just nail this.
Yeah, you would think, right?
Nail this.
You would think. That's I'm going to go with B.
So you're going to say 5,152 cars. John?
I'm going with B too.
I mean, just to change it up,
That's what I like to hear from you.
hoping you guys are wrong. I'll go with close to B, which is D, 4,777.
And the answer is, damn you guys.
I knew the
Should
answer.
have trusted.
So I can keep my job for another year.
I mean,
Good going, Jeff.
I just look at that and I'm astonished at how few cars they sell.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, you know, the average transaction price, the ATP, is at least $350,000, maybe more. So,
A little bit of margin on those.
yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
So how does it exist? How does Rolls-Royce exist, even with the huge sticker price? I mean, they've got those guys in Goodwood, and they're busy doing all this stuff by hand. And how do they do it?
How do they exist?
Yeah.
They exist for high net worth individuals, and that's it. You know, it's a very high end of the market that wants to stand out and wants something, obviously, that not everybody can have.
Could there be? Could an electric car company startup exist in that realm?
Could. You know, we saw obviously some issues with that not quite in that realm, but with Fisker. So I think there have been some attempts there. We're not, market's not quite ready. So I think, yeah, you've got to have some capital behind you to withstand the startup phase, which could be quite long.
You know, look at, not that they did electric, but Mercedes tried Maybach. Didn't work.
Aren't they bringing that back?
Well, they're bringing it back as a trim line. And in fact, there's a special model in China that's kind of a weird wagonish almost looking kind of vehicle with the Maybach name on it. But when you get into that rarefied atmosphere of the 0.5% of 1%ers, heritage counts for so much. You know, being the newest on the block isn't necessarily the best thing. You've got to have this solidity and heritage to your brand. So maybe if somebody started an all-electric Uber luxury brand that revived some brand name from the past, maybe Packard, I don't know, something that would resonate with people, and they believed that, you know, they could trace the roots back, maybe that would work. But when you get up into that upper range, it's not just about value and features and stuff like that. It goes beyond.
Mike, do you think there's any brands that could be brought back that way?
I don't know if we want to. I wasn't really a fan of the Hummer move myself. But I think the other thing with like doing a startup with a high end, whether it's battery or not, is you have all these structural costs. You know, you need it. It's harder than ever to federalize and also get approval for other markets. And how are you going to do that as a startup where you're selling 2,000 units? Like, you know, that's going to drive your price point way super, super high. I'm assuming Rolls-Royce makes pretty good margins, because even when you have all the hand stitching, it's still roughly the same number of hours to put a car together, and you're charging, you know, 4 or 5 times as much. So I think on the brand question is let the dead brands be dead. And although I don't know, maybe there's a lot of people like Pontiac. Maybe there's potential for Pontiac to come back somehow.
But not as this Uber brand.
No, not as an Uber brand. And then the second thing is, I don't think you can. I think it's incredibly hard to be a startup in general, but the trick of, well, we're just going to sell it very expensive ones is not as easy as, is not a solution.
Well, we were talking about the $125,000 Bollingers. I mean, obviously it's not in the $300,000 range, but you know, here's a startup guy who's saying, okay, I'm not going to go for the entry level of the market.
And incredibly simple structure, incredibly simple manufacturing, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's too heavy to crash, so they don't have to. Presumably it's engineered, but they don't have to go through just the process of certification.
Great. Exactly right. And neither for fuel economy, obviously, since it's electric, but even if it was an ICE, they wouldn't have to meet fuel economy standards.
Because of the class the truck is in.
It's so heavy. It's exactly right.
It's not a good thing to have this really heavy electric vehicle, is it?
No, they go through tires quickly. There was something I saw recently about, you know, your Tesla weighs 5,000 pounds. You're buying tires more often than.
It's true. I want to see more data on that, but we know for a fact that EVs wear out tires much faster for 2 reasons. It's the weight of the vehicle, but I mean, there's other big SUVs and stuff like that. The real thing is that low-end torque that everybody loves to use. You know, you're just scrubbing off a little bit more rubber every time that you accelerate compared to an ICE, which has got to build speed. You got to, you know, bring the revs up. Not so with an electric car.
Boy, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? They hit you both ways.
Gary, what else did you? Oh, you know what? I know you got other things that you want us to get into. Let's take another quick commercial break right now. A shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone and DIA MTS.
Whether they're electric, autonomous, or connected, tomorrow's cars must be developed quickly with the highest precision, and they have to be lightweight. DIA MTS can provide what you need, from advanced manufacturing machinery to lightweight components. Learn more at our website at www.d-iamts.com or visit our showroom right next to Metro Airport in Detroit.
All right, we're back talking all things automotive.
Well, I mean, one of the things that happened this week was General Motors Cruise Automation came out with their Origin vehicle, a pod-like structure that, which was, I thought it was sort of odd that it appears to seat 4 comfortably and 6 like in the back of a Malibu. I mean, it seemed to be a tight thing. And it's an electric vehicle. It's an autonomous vehicle. Do you guys see any hope for that?
Eventually. I think.
Will we still be alive, Jeff?
That's a very good question. I think, yes, we will be alive, but I think, our view, And obviously, if you go back, they delayed their original launch, and this is a whole new kind of direction. But I think the reality is, we're still in a test phase. We're still in a geofenced, smaller area phase, and I think, even with this on the road, that's the likelihood over the next several years. So I think it's going to be a while before we really are looking at this as a viable solution to ownership.
Do you see it having any impact on number of vehicles sold in the United States? I mean, any is a loaded word, but I mean, discernible.
No, we really don't. Yeah, I think they're still testing over the next several years, so 5-10 years, I think, before we see some of these in any kind of volume that has a substantial impact on what demand is. And it probably raises overall vehicle volume in the near phase or the launch of it, while you're bringing these out and people haven't replaced their vehicles. So you probably have more vehicles on the road and more vehicles being sold, at least for a period of time, before we start to see it pull back. And again, I think we're quite a ways from that.
It was interesting that, so it's almost coincident. I mean, so the plan there is that this vehicle that they're calling the Origin is a driverless shuttle, right? I mean, that's fundamentally what it is. And,
Right.
and so this would presumably replace someone getting an Uber, right? I mean, and so you're doing that. And then lo and behold, in California, in part because of the, I think it's Proposition 5, where contractors are not necessarily treated as contractors anymore in the state, and which is wreaking havoc with our friends that are freelance writers that want to write for California-based publications. So Uber came out and said to its drivers in certain areas that you can adjust your fares as you see fit. And I just wonder, is that the race to the bottom?
Well, it probably is. I mean, what you're going to do is drive up the cost of having a driver in the car and make an autonomous vehicle all the more appealing.
What do you think?
It could go either way, but I think John's right. My thing with this cruise car is it's kind of a bus. It still comes to your door, which is great. Sorry. But when you think of autonomy, this serves a definite purpose in the transportation universe. It can alleviate traffic. It can enable getting rid of a second car, maybe. But when you think of this dream of autonomy and the vision that automakers have given, it's always this sort of, even if you're in one of those weird, pod boxes, it's this relaxation and personal luxury, or being chauffeur driven without having to pay for a chauffeur. And lo and behold, the first autonomous, not the first, but a major development in autonomy comes out, and it's more of a replacement for a taxi or a bus. So that's a little bit okay, well, what are we trying to achieve here? No one has really, I think, answered that.
Well, but that's not their vision. Their vision is, if you look at what GM said about the Cruise, they'll be able to build these Origins for half the price of what it takes to build a car today. Their vision is fulfilling a need in a geofenced area. They're going to launch in San Francisco. I think if I got it right, they'll be operating in a 7-mile by 7-mile geofenced area, which covers the whole city of San Francisco. And it costs, according to the AAA, around $8,000 to $9,000 to own and operate a relatively new car, a 3-year-old or newer car. And what GM is saying is, we'll be able to save you $5,000 a year if you're able to use this service for your everyday transportation. So it's not just replacing a taxi or an Uber, which you use sporadically. I got to go here, I'm traveling, and I'm in another city, I'll use an Uber. No, what they're saying is, this is what you'll use for your everyday transportation.
Okay, but the thing is that, and I think that Uber has found out with Uber Pool, where the 4 of us would each dial up an Uber, and then I'd get in it, and there's Jeff, and then the 2 of us would go, and then we'd pick you up, and then we don't like to do that.
I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, it's so having this thing that is a thing that'll come to my house, and then the door opens up, and there are the three of you. I'm
know,
like,
but-
what the hell? I don't want to go with you guys.
We're not the right audience for that. This is going to be for households that if you go to them and say, you know what, if you give up your car, you're going to save $5,000 a year.
And you get to think in a place like San Francisco, which is fairly car friendly, it's still a pain to have a car. So you're doing it maybe because you have to. And so this is a solution where, we're going to save you $5,000 a year. That's almost $500 a month. Like you're going to, when someone puts that on those dollars and cents terms, and you go, all right, maybe I have to go to a couple stops, but
Okay, but
that's a few nights out a week.
Okay, but the last time I was in San Francisco, there's a thing called BART, and I can take the train, and there's a thing called the bus, which I can.
But you can't take the BART from San Francisco over to the Valley or over into the East Bay. There's places where you.
I think it goes to East Bay.
There's some limitation to it, is what I'm saying. Like you can get on the train line that goes all the way down the valley, but if you're off that main line, it's very difficult to get somewhere on public transit.
And plus, with any public transit, you got to go to where the public transit is, and you got to go on the route that they're doing. This is going to be a dynamic service that comes right to your
It'll
door.
probably save you
takes-
$6,000 though if you take the.
Well, that may be, but there's a convenience factor in this that I think is going to appeal to a lot of people just because of the cost savings.
I think the appeal's there. The question is, can they execute on it in reality? Are there going to be enough of them? If demand spikes and you end up having to wait 45 minutes to get one of these things, forget it.
Yeah.
So if I can't get one on demand and take me in a fairly convenient way to where I'm going, knowing that, again, there's probably other people, or maybe there's not other people in there with me, depending on what the service looks like. I think I got to see it in real life.
Okay, we all do. And, this is GM's plan and all that. But believe me, they've modeled all this out, too, I'm sure. The real audience, I think, or customer for this is going to be the people who ride BART and who ride bus and the bus and who think, geez, what about that last mile where I got to walk home and it's freezing cold and the wind's blowing and it's raining? No, this is going to drop me right at the door. Boom, I'm in. Sign me up.
A Lime scooter. They don't need to worry about these things. And to Jeff's point, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just like, okay, suddenly there'll be surge pricing because there's a big demand because there's a game at the ballpark, right? I mean, and so when the thing comes, suddenly it's going to be a nosebleed price to be able to get into this thing.
Well, then you only take it to the public transit station. You just use it for the last mile exclusively.
Except for the fact that now the public transit has lost so much business because John thinks they're all going to be in this thing, and then, oh, by the way, there's no gas taxes being paid because they're electric vehicles, which drives down the revenues for.
Don't worry, the politicians will solve that problem. They will tax these things.
And then plus, it's only a 7-by-7 mile area, so you're not going to be able to go down to the valley.
Yeah, to begin with. But, it's like when cell phones first came out. They were only usable in business districts. And now we've built enough cell towers that you can make a phone call anywhere in the country. And that's how the geo-fence posts will get moved.
Jeff, you and I are right.
Yeah. Hey,
So-
what else? Because we're getting down to
all right,
the end.
so it was you mentioned Henry Payne earlier, maybe it was back there, but frequent guest on the show,
Yes.
owner of a Tesla Model 3 who had to go to Cleveland to buy his Model 3. Now the state of Michigan is going to allow Tesla to sell and service vehicles.
Sort of.
In the
Still
state.
convoluted.
Well, it's convoluted, but basically Henry's not going to necessarily have to go down to Cleveland and flatbed his truck or his car. And so is Tesla winning? By the way, their valuation now is what, like
Over
second
$100
biggest?
billion.
Yeah, it's like the biggest in the world now, or
not only
no,
that-
it's not. It's below Toyota, right?
Yeah, Toyota's still higher, right?
Yeah, but now it's above Volkswagen.
Just above Volkswagen, I believe, yeah.
And the big thing is, with that valuation, if he keeps it there, Elon gets like
He gets a payday, doesn't he?
$327 million or something like that.
Sort of like what Mike
Yeah.
makes.
Yeah.
Ooh, no.
So is he doing the right things?
It seems to be. I think, obviously last year was an interesting year, a lot of ups and downs. But I think, the time that it took, or the speed, I should say, that the factory went up in China was incredible.
Breathtaking.
Absolutely breathtaking. I don't think you can repeat that in Europe, because I think, China, you say a factory is going to go up and it just does. I don't know what the regulatory environment is, but I suspect it's not quite the same as it is here or in Europe. So it won't go up as fast, but I think the expansion seems to be starting to take hold. It's all, next up is Model Y. I think the launch of Model Y is going to be key, and see how much does it cannibalize 3, or does it add a lot of incremental volume. But right now, I think probably past the worst of it, and I think converting a lot of naysayers over.
Do you think it's sort of the magic pixie dust that is Tesla versus any other electric vehicle?
I think they do have some magic pixie dust for sure. In addition to that, they've got a lead on the industry on where they are in terms of development. I think that goes a long way as well. But you do have a base out there that no matter what they do or how they go about doing it are going to be huge fans. And I think that is certainly helping them. And it's a global base. It's not something that's just here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bob Wilson wrote in, one of the viewers, good question here. To what extent do end-of-lease EVs make maybe the best possible buy for getting an EV?
It's a good question. I think it depends on, I guess, the term of the lease. Where's the battery life? I suspect that could be a concern or an issue that I'm not sure I want someone's battery at that point, at least at this stage of the game of EVs.
Right.
But maybe down the road, that's an excellent way to jump into them.
Do you see leasing having a big effect on new car sales as these cars are being turned in? I mean, it just seems the leasing is just amped up incredibly, I think.
It has. Now, it did back off a little bit from the highs, but it's still quite a significant proportion of transactions. Mm-hmm. Leasing long loans as well. That's the other trend that we're seeing. Both of those have an interesting impact, I think, on the midterm, because they take the buyer out of the market for a period of time, but then at least the lease part of it, that buyer's coming back in to do something. Mm-hmm. Now, they may shift to the used car market, I suppose, but they're going to need another vehicle. So I think you're creating a churn with the lease. With a longer loan, maybe you're delaying some of those repurchases.
And Mike, before the show started, you were saying some interesting things about the Golf E.
Yeah, so I mean, talking about lease, a lot of the EVs have so much money on the hood and then the federal incentive that the lease purchase price is close to what they're selling for new. The Golf E, it's heavily discounted and it's well under 20 grand once you put in the incentive. I actually have a friend, the current version is like an update, like a 1.5. It's around 120 mile range. I have a friend who has the first gen car and he bought a used e-Golf for almost the same price as the current one comes out the door. Before the current one came out, but that does not speak well to a lease purchase.
No, it doesn't. Right. But I think the point is, automakers, I mean, they're almost panicking now in trying to sell their, not Tesla, but the others like Volkswagen and General Motors with the Chevrolet Bolt. There's massive discounts on those cars.
Yeah, and Volkswagen, I mean, they put everything into EVs. So some of it, I think, is they got to sell, they got to sell the handles to sell the razors. They got to get people knowing that EVs are out there, are getting used to it, and maybe the next car they buy will still be a Volkswagen, and they have to get Electrify America working. One interesting thing is they're putting these up in a lot of places. There's one near my house at a Walmart. There's no sign. I think that's really odd that we don't have a gas station sign for EV charging, so someone that doesn't have an EV has no idea that there's all these chargers all around.
Great point.
And you have different standards. You've got the different groups that are putting them up, and yeah, they're not synchronized, and I think it's challenging for consumers to know where they are.
That's a great point about the signs, though. The general public doesn't believe that there's chargers out there. I think you're really onto something with that. Hey, look,
Just like those car dealerships that I mentioned that are invisible. All right, before we leave, we got to ask him one question.
Yeah.
We didn't ask him.
what?
2020. How's it going to look?
So 2020, a little bit lower than 2019, but so we're still at 16.7 million units in the U.S. here. Most of the decline, though, we expect to be on the retail side, so with consumers. Used car interplay is probably the biggest, and affordability the biggest concern that we have looking at 2020.
Yeah. Hey, we got a couple of calls. Let's bring in the call from Jonathan.
Hey guys, Jonathan out in Old Fan, New Jersey. Great show. You're going to see that exoskeleton, non-painted, stainless steel, Cybertruck type technology spreading between CUVs, sedans, sports cars, pickups. That's going to be the electric car wonder in production techniques across the various manufacturers to bring down the cost to a commodity level to keep consumers buying, and the performance and the savings in gasoline by using electricity. That's my opinion. Thanks a lot. Good show.
Real good. Thanks for your thoughts on that, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. And one last phone call. We always close this out with Clem. Let's bring Clem in.
This is Clem Zarowski in Delmont, Pennsylvania. Regarding this new GM vehicle they're planning of running around and picking you up at your house, for years I rode to work in a carpool, and without a doubt there was always one person that was always late. So how does this work, and who has the priority of where it stops and when it stops? Thank you very much. Bye.
Excellent question, Clem. And next time we run into the GM Cruise people, we're going to have to ask them that.
I would just be concerned being in this thing and, this pod, and the guy across from me has a cold.
This time of year especially, right?
Yeah.
Well, you'd have that in any public transportation.
Not in the bus.
Not in the bus? Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap up at this point. But Jeff Schuster, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, great having you. Mike.
Always glad to be here.
Austin, yeah, good having you too. And Gary, let's keep on doing this. Okay. Real good. Of course, want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world. And by DIA MTS, for advanced manufacturing machinery and lightweight components.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.